On today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we take a first look at this upcoming Thursday night matchup between the Eagles and the Vikings, a rookie report after a Week 1 performance against New England, LOE 3, all that and more on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. As always, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to our everydayers. I'm Louie DiBiase, joined as always by Gino Camilleri. Today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com. That's Jace, J-A-S-E, medical.com. One day away until the Eagles have their Week 2 matchup, Thursday Night Football, Lincoln Financial Field, the home opener against the Minnesota Vikings. And, Gino, this is exactly where we were a calendar year ago. The Eagles had won a very up-and-down, kind of toxic Week 1 game against an inferior opponent against the Detroit Lions. We were wondering if they could put together more of a complete performance. And did they do that and more against the Vikings? Can they do that again? The Vikings are desperate. They're 0-1, can't go down 0-2. It's a very similar script compared to 2022.
This time around, though, you're not going to be fully healthy. We know that. Looks like Reed Blankenship didn't practice today. I have a weird inclination that they're just holding him out right now. I
think he's fine from the way it sounds, yeah.
Sounds like Kenny might not play either. He has a rib injury. We'll find out on that as well. Fletcher Cox did get upgraded, but we know James Bradberry still in the protocol, short week. You know that wasn't going to be a game time decision at all. He was out from the get-go. Once he's in protocol,
on IR as well.
Yeah, Nakobe Dean's out for 4 weeks. So they got to make up some spots. Josh Jobe is going to be in for a big week. We'll see what the rotation is at linebacker now. Nicholas Morrow signed to the 53-man roster. They signed Rashaan Evans officially to the practice squad. But there's a lot of question marks going into this game, Lou. But one of those things is I know Darius Slay had a great performance last year against Justin Jefferson, and Sean Desai said there should be a lot of carryover from that tape that you saw last year of the game plan that they try to attack them with. At the same time, looking at this Minnesota team, most of the time when Kirk has been there, they've had success against the Eagles in the air. So that's always something you have to be cognizant of.
Yeah, last year was a rarity that Kirk did not have success against the Eagles. For the majority of his career, he has gotten this team. And, of course, the secondaries back then were a lot worse for sure. But, yeah, it's definitely a tough test. And I think that's going to be an interesting spot is to really see where Darius Slay is. Right now, of course, that pick 6 last week was incredible. But, last year, that was the best corner performance I've seen of all time as an Eagles fan, the way he erased Justin Jefferson. But then in the second half of the year, definitely was a little more up and down. He's, 32 years old now. This is a good measuring stick game, too, to see where Slay is at compared to a year ago.
Well, I'm confident in Slay because he said that play where I referenced it, that he looked like Willie Mays the other day against the New England Patriots. He said that was the best play he ever made.
I was going to say, it doesn't look like his speed has gone away at all, which is a positive sign.
Did you see the makeup speed on that play, man?
It was incredible. It looks like
the closing speed is, it looks like he's on one of those moving little walkways in airports, that he's just moving a little bit faster than everybody else. And to see that at 32 years old is pretty impressive, right? And I think Avonte Maddox will be big in this game because if those two guys can do their job, then Sean Desai can worry about sending help to Josh Jobe's side. And
that's a good
I thought Avonte played pretty well last week. He was definitely outmatched when it came to size, but he still was in there tackling well. I thought he had some nice pass breakups, and Slay is Slay. It just really comes down to how is Jordan Addison, when he's lined up on Josh Jobe's side, going to win those one-on-ones. That would probably be more of a boxing match, but if they don't shadow, then you really have to figure out a plan to take away Justin Jefferson. I hope they do,
because
you
if
should.
If I'm the Vikings, I'm putting Justin Jefferson in the slot and attacking that middle, or I'm putting him on Jobe's side every single play, and I'm not moving him. And so I think they have no choice but to shadow Darius Slay. And it's still a tough ask because even if Slay is containing Jefferson this entire game, they have a big three now. I don't want to say you call it a big three, but they have a trio of weapons they didn't have at this point last year when they played the Eagles. They didn't have a Jordan Addison type of wide receiver on the opposite side. They didn't have TJ Hockenson at this point at tight end, attacking the middle of the field. And now that you don't have Nakobe Dean, that's a huge liability right now with the linebacker position. Zach Cunningham was not good in coverage last week. You're going to have to ask Christian Ellis and Nicholas Morrow to play as well. And I want Sidney Brown to start at safety. Don't think he's gonna. So you have Justin Evans in there. As you mentioned, Reed Blankenship, a little banged up, didn't practice today. So containing Justin Jefferson is obviously a huge key. He's the best receiver in football right now. But they have two other weapons that they have to pay attention to that they didn't last week or last year. And now you're down James Bradberry. So it's a tough ask. That's the key of the game is, can you contain Jefferson, Addison, and Hockenson?
And I think the way that you counteract that is being able to hit home on Kirk Cousins. And if you saw that Tampa tape last week, even a pretty decent Tampa line. I mean, they're not what they were when we played them in the playoffs a couple years ago, but they still had Vita Vea, who wreaked havoc all over that line. And
you need
now you got to deal with
D line to step up. Like you
need that out of the gate. Out of the
Yeah.
gate, you need that. You need to set the tone early, because the times that Kirk has really had those good outings against the Eagles is when they're able to set up that run and get that play action going, because he's one of the better play action throwers in all of football. And when you give Justin Jefferson that much time to come open, 3 seconds to run a route, nobody's going to be able to play man for that long, right? And like you said, if I'm Minnesota, I'm putting Jefferson to Job's side, just like Stephon Diggs with the Buffalo Bills when they moved him from Sauce's side over to DJ Reed's side Monday night's game. I think it's going to be a very similar game plan. But at the same time, they don't have a Delvin Cook. Their offensive line hasn't gotten
Madison
much better.
did not look good on Sunday. 3.1 yards per carry. They couldn't get the ground game going at all.
It's the offensive line, man. They have Christian Darisaw, right? Like, very good player. But outside of that, it's just replacement level guys that are trying to protect Kirk Cousins. And it just seems to be their method of operations the last couple of years, that's how the Eagles are going to have to attack them once again. And when it comes to the other side of the ball, Lou, when the Eagles offense attacks Minnesota's defense, I think you're going to have a much easier time trying to push the ball in the air than you did last week. They don't have a Christian Gonzalez. They don't have as good of a defensive coordinator as Bill Belichick to disguise all of those coverages. And Jalen Hurts was pretty successful last year against Minnesota. I see the exact type of script. Like, if it's not broken, don't fix it, and get Jalen back to the basic things that worked last year early in this game just to get him in a rhythm. And that's when the game opens up. And that's what I want to see happen.
And again, I don't know if Jalen Hurts is going to be as good as he was week 2 against Minnesota, but I'm expecting this performance to be a lot closer to something we saw in 2022 versus what we saw week 1 against New England. I just can't imagine they have 2 games like that in a row, especially at home. It's against a defense I think is worse than New England's, Gino, from a schematic standpoint. And, they definitely have some more talent, but I think overall the Eagles should have an advantage here on offense through the air. And so even if Kenneth Gainwell is hurt, you got to get DeAndre Swift more involved. Rashad Penny hopefully plays in this football game. I'm expecting a bounce-back performance from the offense.
And I think right away you're going to see Dallas Goedert incorporated, and how is Minnesota going to have to go and defend that, right? And now if Kenny Gainwell is injured, do you see more DeAndre Swift, which presents a higher upside in terms of the passing game as well?
I think that helps the offense. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Definitely
it's not that we want Gainwell to not play, but I think Penny and Swift becoming more involved over Gainwell is an upgrade for this game. Not saying that's the reason the offense was being held back on Sunday, but I think that's definitely an advantage too, to get, as you mentioned, get Swift in the passing game going more. And if you get Penny downhill, that's a tough running back to stop.
That's what I think you have to do against this Minnesota team. Like, make them tackle you on the interior. Yep. They did a pretty good job taking away what most of Tampa Bay presented them last week. Tampa didn't have a ton of success on offense. They put up a little over 200 yards. But seeing how the Eagles performed last week and knowing what this game presents at home, the first game of the season, in prime time, knowing the expectations of this team, it's going to be a raucous environment going against Kirk Cousins, who does not have much success in prime time. You always have to incorporate into that theory as well. But I think the Eagles are set up, Lou, to have a great bounce back game. If they do the little things right, the offensive line looks better. I mean, if the offensive line looks 10% better than it did last week, the game is going to open up exponentially more than it did last week.
For sure, Gino. I want to talk rookies coming up next, our weekly rookie report. How did the Rooks look in the season opener against New England? What is their role on Thursday night against Minnesota? All that and more coming up on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. And guys, today's show is sponsored by eBay Motors. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Lyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each and every week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for your daily draft or scouting the waiver wire every week, we're going to provide you players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So let's see who Vinny has picked for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And it's Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver T. Higgins, who got 8 targets, Gino, in that monsoon of a game against the Cleveland Browns, and he put up 0 fantasy points. This week, he plays a much more banged-up Ravens secondary. They lost Marcus Williams for the year, already had some corner depth issues. I can't imagine the Bengals have 2 stinkers like that in a row through the air, and, of course, Jamar Chase on the other side, but I think T. Higgins is a guy to watch. He's a big bounce-back player.
I think he's in the same boat as a guy in Philadelphia and Dallas Goedert, where both of those offenses, they love to push that ball down the field. Zach Taylor, that's what his offense is predicated on. They couldn't throw the ball last week in those conditions, similar to what the Eagles went through in New England. If it's a nice day and they can air that thing out, I'm with you. You send all the attention to number one side. T. Higgins is probably the second best duo in football outside of AJ and Devontae. Big week, T. Higgins. I think he's going to get even more targets than he got last week.
Vinny Lyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit. Same with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die, I should say, alive at ebay.com/motors. Again, that's ebay.com/motors. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. All right, Eagles fans, we're continuing on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Shout out to our everydayers for making us your first listen Monday through Friday. All right, Gino, we're going to kick things off here in segment 2 with our weekly rookie report, diving into how the Rooks looked Sunday against the New England Patriots, what their role could be tomorrow night against the Minnesota Vikings. And we've talked a lot already about Jalen Carter, but man, it's 3 days later, and I'm still giddy over that performance. I mean, 8 quarterback pressures, led the NFL, a sack, a quarterback hurry. I mean, his 32% pass rush win rate was number 2 among all defensive tackles, only behind Jonathan Allen with Washington. It was an incredible performance, and I started to think back, the Eagles haven't had a lot of high-impact rookie defensive players over the years. I can't remember a defensive rookie on this team having such a dominant opening performance. I mean, I remember in 2012, Fletcher Cox got a sack in his first game against Cleveland, but it was nothing like this. I mean, this was, again, a generational performance.
There was some film guru on Twitter, I forgot exactly who it was, but in the Brian Baldinger realm that said, this guy's already a top 3 defensive tackle in football, if you just look at what he can do. And
I mean, did you see all of Chicago Twitter freaking out about how they totally missed on this guy? I mean, everybody's feeling it.
For a 4th-round pick. That's all they had to give up. A 4th-round pick for Jalen Carter. That maniacal laughter I had on draft night makes all the sense in the world, because that's exactly what we're feeling like right now. Because going into this next game, we were saying, oh man, well, if Jordan Davis or Jalen Carter can perform right away, things are going to be great. Now you're going to get both of them performing. Milton Williams is performing well. And it all comes off the back of having that depth, because Howie Roseman knocked it out of the park in a once-in-a-lifetime draft where he had this opportunity to get a true blue-chip prospect. And man, did he get exactly that. Exactly what you wanted in Jalen Carter was exactly what was on the field the other day. It seems light years beyond all the off-field concerns that we had with this guy. I wasn't really worried about it, because when you turn on the tape and see what he can do, I mean, look at what he was doing against double teams last week. I mean, yeah, it's a banged-up New England offensive line, but heck, dude, if you can beat 600 pounds of man with speed to power, club overs, swims, getting underneath with leverage, he could do it all, and he's going to get better, and he's only in his first week. I mean,
No, I agree.
plus, whatever you want to give him. Give him all the accolades. It was an all-star performance from our rookie.
He got me thinking, too, about this entire defensive line, how they stole Carter. It almost feels like this entire defensive line was stolen in a way, right? Because, I mean, Jalen Carter had no business falling to the 9th overall pick. Fletcher Cox, I remember back in 2012, the Chiefs, a few spots ahead, took Dontari Poe. Josh Sweat falls to the 4th round because of injuries. Hassan Reddick got a much smaller contract in the open market last year than he probably deserved. He probably deserved a lot more money. I mean, look at his average salary per year now compared to the other pass rushers in that top tier. Milton Williams was a late day 2 pick. As you mentioned, he looked unbelievable rewatching the tape against the Patriots. I mean, outside of like Jordan Davis, who you traded up for in the 1st round, a lot of these guys probably shouldn't be Eagles. And that's just how good they've been at just finding value with these pass rushers. Not saying they're all late round picks, but they probably should have went to other teams higher than they did.
They clearly have a type, because if you look at the get off rate,
Yeah.
they had 5 guys in the top 10.
Yeah, it
and
was
most of them were interior rushers.
Carter, Sweat, Reddick, Milton, and Fletch all inside that top 10.
If you could
And
get
two,
off
and
the
two
ball,
of them are over 300 pounds, by the way. I mean,
yeah. If you could get off the ball, possess strength, have the ability to hold your gap, 2 gap, 1 gap, 1.5 gap, if you're versatile and you can be moved all over that defensive line and play multiple positions, but you are explosive and you work hard in the run game and the pass game, that's the Eagles' MO at that position since going back to BG. Like, that's why they loved him. Undersized, shorter arms, but what could he do? He works hard. He just gets better every single year. He's learning from those guys, Lou. He's learning from Fletcher Cox. He's learning from the great BG. He's got Jordan Davis there, and he's only just scratching the surface. Like, you're going to talk about this guy the way that you talk about those Micah Parsons, the Aaron Donalds. Not saying that he is going to get to that and maintain that continuity, but when you're in a meeting room with your coaches, the first thing you say, all right, we're playing the Eagles. We got to take away Jalen Carter. How are we going to do that? That's going to be the talking point for the next 10 years, hopefully.
I agree. And Gino, the other 1st round selection didn't do much on Sunday, had under 10 snaps. It's Nolan Smith. He got outsnapped by Derek Barnett. I don't love that. Again, it is week 1. A lot of times the rotation can be weird with rookies on both sides of the ball. But for me, I do think Nolan Smith needs to be more involved. I do wonder what his role will be this week. I'm not saying suddenly he's going to be this inside linebacker that's playing on every down, but you lose Nakobe Dean. Again, of course, you have a more traditional linebacker out there with Christian Ellis and Zach Cunningham, but maybe if you're using more defensive back sets, maybe you get more creative and use Nolan in some other spots too. I would like to see him on the field more, especially over Barnett. I do not want there to be a theme and a trend this year where Barnett's playing over him.
I honestly didn't think Derek Barnett played too bad, and I don't want to say that too loud, so I'm going to whisper
He
that.
wasn't
But
bad. I know. But, like, come on, man.
No.
Nolan Smith's the future. You got to get him out there.
But Nolan can't ever play 7 snaps in a game ever again.
Yeah.
Ever again.
Maybe the shoulder has something to do with it. Maybe he still isn't 100%. That might be part of it.
But if you're willing to put him out there, like, he's got to be good enough to go.
That's
but
true,
I think if you saw what Sean Desai was starting to do last week, where he would put multiple guys up at the line of scrimmage, and very similar to what Bill Belichick incorporates, where some guys will rush, some guys will pop out. Nolan's the perfect guy for that, because they did try to train him during training camp as an off-ball linebacker to where he can be used in coverage. That's a perfect type of joker / disguise piece where you can move him all over the formation.
Yeah.
And it's going to be evident that you send pressure at Kirk Cousins. He's not a mobile guy. If they don't have a similar game plan to what New England had last week of getting that ball out quickly, that's where Nolan Smith's going to eat, because if Kirk tries to escape the pocket, he's chasing him down from the backside on a speed rush. Like, he's probably going to chase him down, but he can't do that if he's only got 7 reps. I think you put him out there now because he's clearly better athletically than those other 2 guys, right? I think you're going to go lighter at linebacker, more of those dime penny type of sets where there's 5 defensive linemen, 1 linebacker, more defensive backs. Keep the linebackers off the field unless they're named Nolan Smith, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's a speed and athleticism element to his game you want out there, especially against this very talented Minnesota Vikings team. And Feel the same way about safety, Gino. I would love to see Sidney Brown out there a little more this week. Not saying he's going to be an every down starter over Justin Evans. But I do, and Terrell Edmonds, I think, could be out there sometimes on an assignment against TJ Hockenson. I think you're going to see more 3 safety looks. With that, I would like to see more Sidney Brown. I just think he can cover so much more space. And in that middle of the field right now, with how susceptible it is, I'd like to have an athlete like that around there.
That's what I'm saying. And they just need that speed and athleticism element to it. And
especially, Gino, they ran a lot of cover 1 where they had Justin Evans as the single high safety. To me, I'd rather have that be Brown.
Yeah, because if you get beat and he's the last guy to hawk somebody down or have the range to go sideline to sideline, I'll take Sidney Brown all day long. And I have to avoid saying Sidney Jones. Like, it's the first thing that clicks into my head because I love him so much. But
I mean, if there was a Razul something, I would be saying
exactly. But Sidney Brown, same with Nolan Smith. I think between them 7 snaps and Nolan got all 7 of them on defense.
They need to be on the field more.
It's malpractice.
The fact that Derek Barnett
in the preseason.
Exactly. Derek Barnett and Justin Evans should not be out snapping them like that. No way.
No, they're the future, and those guys are 1-year rentals, and that's what you have to avoid to not go back into what 2017, 2018 was, because look at that young cornerback room. Not all those guys got out there. Jalen Mills is playing over them, right? Like, you never got to get those guys on the field. Get them on the field and see what they could do because it pays dividends. Look at Jalen Carter, man. I'm just saying, if you believe that highly in all 3 of these guys to dress them on game day, and Sidney Brown shows what he showed on special teams where the guy clearly can get downfield and hit, put him on defense. That's what Sean Desai wants. Fast, physical, aggressive. That's exactly who Sidney Brown is. That's exactly who Nolan Smith is. I think all 3 of them should have a great game this week, but we know Jalen Carter is going to be the belle of the ball, as always.
Sure. All right, Gino, coming up next, LOE3. We're both going to pick 3 player props each to ride with per FanDuel in Eagles-Vikings coming up this Thursday night. That's coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles.
Before we talk about LOE3, I have to talk to you about Jace Medical. If you don't know what Jace Medical is, well, I'll break it down for you. They provide you with the Jace case, which inside it has 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. Somebody like me who lives here in Denver, there's plenty of times where we go up into the mountains, we have no cell service, and heck, if you turn the wrong way, you scrape yourself on a rock, and you got no medicine around, you might have to get back into town. Well, if you have the Jace case, it is the way to be prepared in life-saving situations, and you could get it today, and you could save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jace Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using my code LOCKEDON. That's LOCKEDON at checkout on jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Don't be unprepared. Make sure you're prepared. Get the Jace case today.
Guys, today's show is also sponsored by Prize Picks Daily Fantasy. It's the most fun I've had, winning up to 25 times my money this football season. You just select 2 or more players, pick more or less than their projected stat projections, and place your entry. Testing my skills on Prize Picks this football season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Wasn't big into daily fantasy, honestly, until Prize Picks came along. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. This week on Prize Picks, I'm riding with Justin Jefferson for less than 100 yards. I think Darius Slay is going to shadow him and maybe have just as much success as he did last year on Monday Night Football. And I'm also riding with Lamar Jackson for more than 1 passing touchdown. I think he's going to bounce back from a weird performance last Sunday against the Houston Texans. He's got too many weapons. Zay Flowers looked amazing in his rookie debut as well. That's what I'm riding with Prize Picks. What about you? Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, Prize Picks is going to match your first deposit up to $100 when you go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL. All right, Eagles fans, one final segment here on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Tomorrow we've got a game, Eagles-Vikings on Thursday Night Football, but make sure in the morning, get ready because we do have another episode crossover Thursday with Luke over at Locked On Vikings. But, before we do that, one of our flagship segments we do every single week, it's LOE3 presented by FanDuel. And so we do 3 player props each every single week. Last week, you did a lot better than I did. You called an audible at the last second, and that was huge, man. Big adjustment. You went 2-1. I went 0-3. I did not give the people their money back.
It was out of fate that Rashad Penny got scratched, and I had to
because you
make
had the
another
anytime
pick.
touchdown, right?
Yeah, and he couldn't even go, so I couldn't even get the action on that. So I said, you know what? Let's take a long shot. Let's bet on the kid, the wonderkind, Jalen Carter, to get an anytime sack. Cashes with 58 seconds left at plus 600. I also cashed on Jalen Hurts over 20.5 completions. The only one I did not cash on was Dallas Goedert anytime touchdown, which he didn't get an anytime touch as it was.
I had Kenneth Gainwell anytime touchdown. I had the right idea. Gainwell
close.
was featured. He did not get into the end zone, though. Over 64.5 receiving yards for Devontae Smith. He had 47. And then the other one, too, I'm drawing a blank, but I believe it was another passing one that I just had no business riding with.
Yeah.
Oh, it was DeAndre Swift. It was the over on 14.5 receiving yards, and he only got 2 touches. So
better than taking Quez Watkins, which you almost talked yourself into on Sunday, I saw.
I should have, man. I should have. Quez is my poison, but sometimes he's my saving grace as well. This week, here we go, Eagles-Vikings. Let's ride with our 3-player props. And Gino will start. We both started with the wide receivers. You have an A.J. Brown bet. I have Devontae Smith. You have the over on 5.5 receptions for A.J. I have an anytime touchdown for Devontae. I think he's going to get a touchdown in his second straight game. Plus 160 odds for me, minus 114 for you.
I think both of those receivers are yet again going to have another fantastic outing, right? And last week, Christian Gonzalez is made to defend a guy like A.J. Brown, right? Bigger build, 6'1", longer arms. I think he has a much better matchup this go around. They're going to be taking on Byron Murphy on one of those sides. I like either of these guys against Byron Murphy in that matchup. I think AJ is somebody that you just get the ball in space early, let him get some yards after the catch, give Jalen his confidence, and Devontae is going to find his way open in the end zone. Or if he's not, Jalen's going to put a ball on a dime and hit him once again.
So now we both have Jalen Hurts bets. I have the over on 1.5 passing touchdowns. I think he's going to have a game like he did last year against Minnesota where he is throwing dimes. I think he's going to bounce back from a lackluster performance last week as a passer. You have an anytime touchdown for Jalen. Minus 122 for me, minus 125 for you.
I said last week, Jalen Hurts anytime touchdown seemed kind of like the sucker bet. I think if anybody's going to want to get in the end zone after their performance to really put this team on their back, I think Jalen Hurts on the ground, it's going to be one of those days. You're not going to see Minnesota really playing as much zone as New England did. I think you're going to get more man matchups, which should open up the run game for Jalen, and they're going to be in the red zone, in my opinion, a lot of times, and it's only a matter of time before we get the tush push on one.
I predicted Jalen was going to have over 30 passing touchdowns this year, so I need him to start picking that up. So I'm going to ride with that bet here. Yeah. He got one against the Patriots, but I'm going to need a few more against Minnesota. And then, Gino, you have another Jalen Hurts bet too. You have the over on 50 rushing yards at plus 114. I like that. Last week, he had just a little under 40. I think that should go up for sure. I think Hurts is going to play a little more loose this week. Again, he just felt like he was a little timid because of the pressure. Maybe some of it was play calling. I think he's going to let loose.
Oh, I definitely think so as well. And as I said in that last point, New England, they wanted to keep everything in front. They wanted Jalen Hurts to not have any openings, nobody turn your back and take your eyes off that guy. As I said with Minnesota, they're not going to play as much zone. He was right near that 50-yard number last week in what was a subpar rushing performance for him outside of that like Houdini type of run, right?
But yeah, outside of that, he didn't run much. He was very much like inside the pocket.
Yeah, and if you go back, and I had actually tweeted this out, the play where he fumbled it, they ran a similar play back in 2019 against the Bills where Jordan Howard was the lead blocker. They also did that in that game where Kenny Gainwell was the lead blocker. They didn't give him a lead blocker on that one, and if you see the end zone view, it is single high. There's nobody behind Jabril Peppers. If there's a lead blocker, Jalen Hurts is taking that thing to the house. I think he's going to have a fantastic performance in the air, on the ground. If anybody was to bounce back from that type of performance, Lou, on this team, who more would you feel confident with than Jalen Hurts?
I agree. Speaking of bounce back, my final bet at plus 122, Dallas Goedert, the over on 50 receiving yards. If you remember last year, Devontae Smith did not have a single catch, a single yard in the opener against Detroit. Then suddenly heavily featured, I think over 7 catches against Minnesota. Yep. They put him in the slot. They wanted him over the middle. They went high volume there with Devontae. I think it's going to be a similar strategy this week. Get Dallas Goedert going early in the red zone, in the screen game. I think he's going to have over 50 yards. Gino, again, you can't have Dallas Goedert not involved in the passing game. He's just far too valuable.
And that's one of those bets, Lou, where this guy could cash it on one play, and it could be a tight end screen that just every block hits and he takes it to the house yards after the catch, or he catches a ball 15 yards over the middle, makes one man miss, and he picks up 30, 40 yards on a single play. And this game, in my opinion, Lou, I think it's going to be a lot of points, in my opinion, and I think it's going to come on the Eagles' end. And one of those 35-point performances, I don't know about shootout, but I think there's going to be a lot of points.
I think it could
they'll
be.
get close to the total.
I'm not saying the defense is going to struggle. I think the pass rush could be in for a big game, but there's definitely some ways that Kirk Cousins can have a nice game through the air. So I think the Eagles might have to score some points. It's going to be an exciting one, though. Tomorrow night, still got another show for you tomorrow morning with Luke over at Locked On Vikings. Crossover Thursday continues right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Shout out to our everydayers for making Locked On Eagles your first listen Monday through Friday. Until tomorrow, though, for Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off. Thank you for downloading, thank you for watching, and thank you for listening. Let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.